Thank you for those very kind words, Milt. They're very much appreciated. I'd now like to call upon Mr. Keith Shepherd, representing the Bomber Command Association of Canada, to introduce our guest speaker. Keith?
Here. On the night of May the 16th and 17th, 1943, 19 Lancasters of the newly formed 617 Squadron roared into the sky on the famous Dams raid. At the controls of F for Freddy was Flight Sergeant Ken Brown. His home was in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and he was 22 years old. A Bomber Command veteran, he had completed 15 operations with 44 Squadron, but on this night, his efforts were to win him the award of the Conspicuous Gallantry Medal. And what of afterwards? Well, Ken stayed with 617 Squadron for a year, but I'll leave it up to him to give further details of that period and the time since. Ken and his wife Beryl now live in White Rock, BC. And we're indeed fortunate to have with us this evening one of the original members of 617 Squadron. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guest speaker, Ken Brown, the Dambuster.
After all those accolades, I don't know if this speech is going to stand up with it. Before I start, however, I wanted to comment on two things. The message from the designer of the Lancaster's daughter. I was at Buckingham Palace when he received his award. A very gracious fellow. It was my roommate who was the pilot of the Tudor that crashed with Sir Strudwick on it at the time. It was a great loss to us, believe me. David was one of the best pilots in our squadron at DSO and Bar, DFC and Bar. But this happened shortly after the war down at Farnborough. May I commence by, first of all, saying, Mr. President, members of the Lancaster Society, ladies and gentlemen, we turn back the pages of history, and sometimes they cause a great deal of furor in your stomach. But getting to the time that I joined the 617 Squadron, I was flying with 44 Squadron. My CO was also a BC winner. And we were briefed to go to Berlin. After the briefing, he said, "Brown, report to my office." Immediately after briefing, which I did, and he said, "You are transferred to a new squadron." I wasn't too happy about that. I said, "Sir, I'd rather stay here and finish my tour with 44. He explained in his very curt manner that was impossible. It was a name transfer, and he could do nothing about it. So we went to Berlin, and on our return, we got packed up, and off we went to 617. But before we went, the wing commander wished me well and said, "Do you realize, Brown, you're going to be the backbone of this new squadron?" Well, we arrived over at Scampton, and we started to look around as to who was there. There were an awful lot of DFCs, not so many DFMs. We realized that perhaps we weren't really all what was set up to be. My wireless operator sauntered over to me and said, "Skip, if we're the backbone of this squadron, we must be damn close to the ass end." I began to wonder how I got there with all of it. When I was going through Manchester training and Lancaster training, there was a fellow by the name of Mick Martin who has perhaps become one of the RAF's greatest. He was my instructor. At that time, so was a fellow that we knew as Terry Tiram. Everybody in the outfit knew Terry. He was teaching G at the time. G was a navigation aid, and it was new at the time, so Terry was sort of our expert on it. However, speaking of Martin, he took me up on fighter affiliation. This is where you take off and you have a fighter aircraft attack you, and he shows you how to evade a fighter attack. Well, he played around with the aircraft and showed me a few things. And then he said, "Okay, young fellow, let's see what you can do." So in midair, we changed seats. And I said, "Anything you can do, Buster, I can do too." Where he said, mumbled something that he didn't think my mother had been married when I was born. We got on to the squadron. I'd never met Wing Commander Gibson before, so this was a new experience. We were all sitting out in the lawn in front of the briefing room. Someone said, "Briefing's ready. Come on in." So we marched into the briefing room, which was right down the flight line. I wasn't last in, but I did close the door. When I did so, he said, "Brown, report to my office after briefing." Sounded familiar. However, I couldn't believe it. When I reported to his office, the adjutant met me, marched me in, and he had me on charge for being late for a briefing. I thought he was kidding, but he wasn't. So he then read out the charge of being late for a briefing, an operational briefing, and advised me whether I'd take a court-martial or his punishment. I said, "I'll take your punishment, sir." So he said, "Fine, you'll wash all the windows on the outside of the briefing room and the inside of the briefing room, all after duty hours." As we were flying about 18 hours a day, that was really something. I wasn't going to let this really stump me, so I did it. And I did it night after night. It was one of those things. Wing Commander Gibson had a very high standard for everyone, and you had to meet it, and meet it on his terms. He was a really strong and staunch disciplinarian. He had been brought up in a boys' school as a head prefect, and I still think he handled the thing that way. At least I thought so after about the 99th window. About this time, we started our low flying. And you've heard various stories about we started at 60 feet. It really wasn't so. We started our low flying cross countries over England at about 200 feet. That lasted about 3 days. And we were down to 150 feet. And I did a cross country one day, and as I came across a new aerodrome was being built, an awful lot of people around it, there was headed straight for the hangar, and I thought, well, I better pull up. There's no use trying to get through it. So I pulled over top of the hangar. When I got back the next day at briefing, and by the way, let me explain that the Royal Observer Corps kept track of us all the time, so Guy got our altitudes no matter where we were and had a report on them next morning. So at briefing he said, "Brown, what were you doing going over top of the hangar? And I said, well, I thought it was a good idea. And he said, 200 feet? Hardly. You'll do that one again. It wasn't a bad cross country anyhow. So I did it the next day. When I came to the hangar, same thing. All these men working on top of the hangar, this side of it and so forth. So I put it down on grass level and then came up over top of the hangar. And there was people sliding off the top of it, running in all directions. So next day at briefing, he looked in my direction again and said, Brown, I said low, but not that low. We ran into problems. I want to really try and bring out the character of Guy Gibson more than anything, so bear with me a bit. The next time I had a problem with him, we were doing low-level night runs on the aerodrome. And what they did was put a great sheet across the runway at one end, and so many yards down the other, another sheet. You had to start at the end of the runway at 1,500 feet and dive, cross the first sheet at 70 feet, cross the second sheet at 70 feet, and at the end of the runway be at 1,500 feet. It was quite tricky. However, this particular night, David Shannon and I were doing the exercise, and he did his, and David happens to be an Australian. So we changed seats, and he got over on the other side. And I did mine, and the rain started in dear old England, coming hell-bent for election. So by the time I finished, it was really a soak-out. So in taxiing in, I said, Dave, keep your head out the window, and I'll keep my head out my window so we can see. So we're taxiing. We couldn't see out the front. The rain was that heavy. David got his face wet, so he closed the window. I didn't know this. I head out the window like an idiot getting wet. And lo and behold, we had a marshaller there, and he was telling us to turn. We turned, and the port outer, or the starboard outer, on that side, ticked what they call a totem pole, which was a pole with lights on it. Well, I knew Gibson wouldn't take that very well. So next morning at briefing, he had, Brown, I'll see you in my office. I knew damn well he wasn't going to compliment me on my window washing. However, we started out using the Derwent Dam, amongst other targets. And believe me, we didn't have a clue as to what was going to be the target. Nobody even mentioned dams. We thought the Turpits or some other thing. We went up to the Derwent Dam, and there was a moonlight. There was moonlight. But unfortunately, there was a few clouds around. And in the Derwent, there's a row of hills down the east side and a slight cut-off at the end. And you've got to cut around this and come at the dam. Well, Guy Gibson decided he would make the first run. And his bomb aimer happened to be an Australian. So he runs in on this dam, and just as he was going in, a cloud came across the moon, so it was damn dark. He came down on the water without lights then, rushing towards this thing. And we were equipped with VHF radio, which was the fighter boys' radio. Had a little toggle switch at the side. Transmit that way, receive this way. Guy left it open. Lo and behold, we dashed in towards this, or he did. And the bomb aimer says, "This is bloody dangerous." I think everybody in every aircraft was hollering just hearing those remarks. Then along comes the dams raid. it's unbelievable now. The pilot, the navigator, and the bomb aimer were briefed on the 14th. But we couldn't tell our crew what the target was. So on the 15th, they found out what the target was. We were still shaking. We weren't terribly impressed for the simple reason that the dress rehearsal, when they dropped the bomb itself, 2 of the aircraft, their tail was damaged to such an extent that they were lucky to get back. However, such was the case. We were going on the dams raid. A Padre friend of mine always remembers, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, stand before the wall. I think in everyone's life that has to come up. Once you find out that this is something that you really hadn't expected, how well do you handle it? I think everybody had to handle it his own way. That night we were perched out on the grass. It was a beautiful night. Clear sky, no cloud, waiting for the buses to take us out to the aircraft. John Burpee, a Canadian pilot officer Burpee, came over to me, thrust out his hand, and said, "Goodbye, Ken." I said, "Goodbye, John. I didn't expect he'd come back." You see, some people feel that way. Then we got on board a bus. There were 3 crews on 1 bus. And as the aircraft or the bus stopped to let the first crew off, then the second crew got off. And my tail gunner, when the second crew got off and the bus moved on, he was very quiet. And then it stopped for us. So we moved over towards the aircraft. And my gunner stood there where he'd got off the bus. I said, "Come on, Mac, let's go." He said, "Skip, you know those guys aren't coming back, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, I know." So he sort of said, "Well, damn it." So we got aboard the aircraft. You see, in most pictures today, they show the Dambusters taking off on runways. That wasn't so. We took off on grass. The bomb that I had on the aircraft was marked with 11,960 pounds on the side of it. I only found out this year why that was so. Because when the bomb was made with a casing and a wooden cover, the whole thing weighed that much. But once it was removed, then the real weight came off. We went out to the aircraft. The usual thing. We wet all the areas around the dispersal, some more than others. And then we tried to take off. Well, we knew such a beautiful night, but no wind. We needed that wind because we're on the short runway. And the hedge on the short runway was 1,000 feet tall. At least it looked that way when you were taking off. We got the aircraft into the air and then discovered that we had to use climbing power, 2650 at 9 to keep the old thing in the air. And the next exercise was to get down to 60 feet and try out the guns, the lights, and 2 lights that would focus down on the water to form a figure 8. And also turn on the motor which rotated the bomb. Now, you've heard it said many times we flew at exactly 60 feet. Absolutely. At 60 feet. When that bomb rotated, believe me, it was like driving a truck or anything else over the rails of a railway, unbalanced as it was. And once we got that settled in, then we came onto the coast, the Dutch coast. Immediately we were in the area of Geilsruiten, which is a fighter dome, which we all knew. The Luftwaffe night fighters were there at the time. And Pilot Officer Burpee was about 1.5 miles off to the north coast. And they opened up on him, and he blew up on the airport. So we knew we had one less. We went on towards Ham, and I just couldn't help but there was a train moving along a gentle slope. And I said, okay, gunners, here's where you can get your exercise now and your target practice. So we took on the train. We flew right alongside it. We were having trouble, as everyone else was, with high tension wires. They were our greatest danger at any time. And without shooting a line, if the wires in the moonlight would flutter up here, you know you'd have to go underneath them. So you'd hope they'd flutter down here because you had a chance to go over them. It was that quick. We lost 2 aircraft to those wires. They merely slapped into them. Deadly stuff. As we came along to Ham, they were really waiting for us. Many of the other 2 waves had passed that way. So they just poured it down. As a matter of fact, they were firing down at us. They're on a little bit of a lip as we went through the valley. However, Otley was on my starboard side about 1 o'clock, and they hit him, and he immediately blew up. His tanks went first, and then his store. I have a piece of that aircraft. It was presented to me on my recent trip to England. It's no larger than your fist. However, when that happened, the whole valley was just one orange ball. I didn't have too much of an alternative. Not that there was any bravery connected with it. There was a road off to the port. Everything was trees and this road, and I could just see it because of the fire from his aircraft. So I dove and I went down the road, and they were shooting off the tops of the trees as we went along. Then, much to my consternation, that damn road led right into a castle, and I'll never forget that castle door. We had to dip, and the left wing went through 2 turrets as we went through the castle, but we were pretty slow. We arrived at the Moyna Dam. It had been breached at that time. The gunners were still fairly active. We thought we'd leave them alone to their own, and we went over to the Sorpy Dam. The Sorpy was a different construction altogether. It was a Nerf dam, where you have a solid core and earth on either side. Very difficult to breach. One thing that they never really took a hard look at, such a dam, you have to have a spillage. And the spillage in that particular dam, which I visited twice after the war, is a natural. If we would have spun our bomb and gone to the wall, which was the spill wall, we could have taken it out as well. But our tactics were to run parallel with the dam and drop our bomb in the middle so that it would explode, wash out the front of it, and crack the wall, and the water would do the rest. But we needed more than one. The only problem with it was the whole darn valley was full of fog. When we arrived there, they told us that there would be a church up on top of the village. And we found that all right. Just the spire of the church. So I tried to position myself from the spire. I didn't do too well. I got behind the dam in my first run. When I found myself at ground level behind the dam, I had to climb up roughly 1,800 feet. It wasn't, it didn't do my nerves any good at all, because I was on top of the trees and I had to do a flat turn. I couldn't move the wing down. I had to stand on the rudder to get around. And then we were down in the valley again. Well, we did quite a number of runs on the dam before we were able to clear enough of the fog away, which the propellers constantly going through did. And I must say, according to the historians today, it was a near perfect drop. And I didn't even write them about it. However, we were pleased with it, and as far as the explosion was concerned, the water spout went up to about 1,000 feet, and so did we. I think we ended up about 800. There was one thing that sort of bugged me. When we went to the Moyna Dam, one of our aircraft had been shot down there, and I felt we owed the fellow a visit. So I went back, and as soon, all the other aircraft had left, but as soon as we came over to Moyna, mind you, they were throwing 20 millimeter at us. I think there was a few that were 37 millimeter. And I figured that we owed that fellow a visit. So we came real low, below the towers, straight on at him. And I heard this fellow's story about 3 weeks ago in Germany. And he said, no, I won't try his German. Anyhow, we opened up about 500 yards, carried right in over the tower, and the rear gunner depressed his guns, and we raked the thing as we went through. Well, there was no firing coming from that tower when we left. We figured we had done him in. However, the fellow got the Iron Cross, so we weren't that successful. The worst was really yet to come. It was then daylight, it was just breaking. We had to go across and up the Zuider Zee. There was no horizon. The mud from the Zuider Zee and the sky were all one. So I started across strictly on my altimeter with my head below the cockpit top at 50 feet, and I hung on to it. I've been told by a famous wing commander in the RAF, never ever pull up. If you're low, never pull up. So I hope he was right, because all hell broke loose within a matter of 15 minutes. Searchlights, even though it was light, caught us from the starboard side and straight on. There was a lot of light immediately in front of us. The cannon shell started to go through the canopy. The side of the aircraft was pretty well blown out. And there was only one thing I could do, and that was go lower, so I put it down to 10 feet. We came across, and actually their gun positions were on the sea wall. So they were firing slightly down at us, and I guess they couldn't believe that we were lower than what they could fire. So in this turmoil with the front gunner blazing away at them, I just got a glance for a moment, and I could see the gunners either falling off because they were hit from our guns, or rather, they were jumping off to save their skin. I pulled up over top of them, and we all gave a great sigh of relief I think I've never had a bowel movement that ever gave me greater relief. We figured we had it made at this stage of the game. I called each of the crew members, and I was really surprised to find that no one had been hit. A great deal of damage. My wireless operator said, "Hey, Skip, come on back and crawl in and out the holes with me." I did go back. I wondered how badly and what damage had been done to our landing gears, etc. But by that time, it was broad daylight, of course. And I'm sure the Germans figured that we were a kamikaze crew or something stupid enough to do what we did. Came back to base, and we were quite elated that we'd all made it through. I called my squadron call sign, and in my enthusiasm, I said, "This is F for Freddy." And a little laugh voice come back and said, "Hello, F for Fox." That too had changed while we'd been away. We didn't really know of the losses, however, until we landed. Even then, we were kind of naive, because when I went into my dispersal point where 10 aircraft should be, there was one. And we thought, I wonder where the other fellows landed. But you see, out of the 19, one had hit the water on the Dutch coast. As a matter of fact, the tail gunner was under water when the aircraft pulled out. He made it back. Another aircraft was hit by light flak, and his intercom went. So consequently, of the 19, you're now looking at 17 that went beyond the Dutch coast. We couldn't quite believe that there were so many missing. When we got out of the aircraft, the ground crew of all the aircraft were standing around, long face, tears running down their cheeks. We were the only ones that were sort of elated and saying, well, we made it back. But it was a sad thing to know how the ground crew felt. Someone mentioned here tonight how the ground crew worked on our aircraft, and believe me, they did. My aircraft was so badly damaged it had to go back to the factory. But the next aircraft I had was very badly shot up. My ground crew worked on it. When I came in at 6 o'clock in the morning, they worked all day, all night, all the next day, and the next night I took it out the following morning. So I have a great deal of respect for ground crew personnel. They did a tremendous job. And it's unfortunate at times we don't really recognize what they did. They were really a godsend to us all. Well, the big day came. My stock in trade with Guy Gibson improved tremendously after the dams went. I was commissioned, and I was assigned a married quarter, which was really an officer's married quarter, which we had one room in, and every room was filled with another officer. In this particular place, I was on the ground floor, and every night I came back, or evening I came back, there was a huge rabbit that was bounding around the field at the back. And I figured that rabbit would look better on my plate than in that field. So I borrowed a shotgun from the armament section, a few shells. I stashed them in my closet. I come home one night, sure enough, there was that rabbit. So I took off with the shotgun across the field, and the old rabbit was well ahead of me, avoiding my flak. Crossed the highway on the other side and went into a field. So I followed him in, and he went down a hole by a big tree. I thought, that's fine, I'll just wait him out. So with my shotgun at my side, here I was waiting for this damn rabbit. And what happens? Down that road comes a constable with a 2IC, in other words, a training officer. And he stops and he hollers, "I say, do you know you're trespassing?" And I said, "Go on, I'm waiting for a rabbit." Which didn't go over very well. So he immediately, the two of them, dismount and come over. And he said, "You know, you're on private property." And I said, "Well, the rabbit was over on our property, and it came down to this, and I'm claiming it." He said, "I demand to see your identification." Well, at that time, I realized that I'd taken my ID out and put shotgun shells in it. So I said, "I'm sorry, I can't disclose my identification." That was as quick as I could think, being on a secret squadron. And he said, "In that case, you'll have to come down to the station." So I said, "Well, I'm sorry, I'll have to decline your invitation." And he said, "I demand to know why." And I said, "Because I've got a double-barrel loaded shotgun in my hand and you got nothing." Boy, did the faces change. However, 2 days later, we took a trip. We had to do a mission into North Italy. We did a bombing trip to Italy and then cut across to North Africa and landed. So I was away for about 7 days. But when I came back, the ad said to me, "You know, there was a couple of constables out here with a warrant. They were looking for a tall, blonde Canadian, and as you were the only one that fitted the group, we gave them your name." I said, "How kind of you." Lo and behold, he said, "I think the CO might want to see you too." Now, this is my point in my whole story. Guy Gibson took the warrant, went before the courts. I don't know what he said, but he never, ever mentioned that to me. That was his way of letting you know that you're accepted. It took a long time. Guy Gibson came to Canada and visited his navigator's family. He visited my family. He went and visited a number of flying schools and told them what a good friend he had in Ken Brown. Didn't tell him of the 3 charges he had me on. However, my mother was very pleased with his visit and to see him. And it's something today. Beryl and I have just been over to the UK. I introduced the survivors of the Dams raid to the Queen Mother. Beryl introduced the wives of the Dambusters to the Queen Mother. And we were exposed to a great deal of the English hoopla about the great Dambusters. They do a great deal on it. We went to the Derwent Dam, which we practiced on. There was over 100,000 people there. I'd never seen a crowd like that. But they sell their Air Force this way. They sell their museums that way. And they do a good job of it. I'm not criticizing them at all. It's something that perhaps we can learn something about in supporting our Air Force and supporting our museums in Canada, because Canadians were not as directly affected as the British, and consequently many of them have no idea at all of what their uncles, their brothers, etc., did during the war. It was a tremendous contribution. I'd like to just quote a couple. Do you know that 25% of all aircrew in the UK were Canadians? Did you know that per capita, I repeat, per capita, Canada had more aircrew and operational outfits than what England had? Do you know that 62% of all casualties in the Canadian Armed Forces were aircrew? There's an awful lot we can be thankful for. Of the 10,919 airmen killed in Bomber Command were Canadian. Today, I've even been asked, well, did Canada really get involved in the war? We don't want to perpetuate the thought that war is something glorious and wonderful, but we do want to put the thought across. I've been through Germany, I've been through England just recently, and I was so damn glad to get back to Canada. It's the most wonderful country in the world. The Nanton Lancaster Association provides that link between those who are not here to speak on their own behalf, to let the younger generation realize that a tremendous contribution was made because the young fellows were so concerned that we might lose our way of life here in Canada. That was their main concern, that this Canada of ours might suffer. And at times, especially with our political situation today, I think we can all give that a little bit of serious thought. I was proud to stand among, as they called themselves, guys. I never heard that in the RAF. As I am sure they would be proud to have the Nanton group expound their desire and their wishes for this country. I take off my hat to the people in Nanton and for the perpetuation that they have achieved here in their society. I thank you.
Words can't express how much we thank you for your kind words, your words of encouragement, your words of recollection. And I think that if nothing else, you have given everyone here tonight a better sense of who we are and what we were and where we should be headed. Thank you very much. This is one of our signed prints that we had the famous Canadian aviation artist J.B. Rutherford commissioned to do for us. It depicts our aircraft, F-2T, who we dedicated to Squadron Leader Ian Bazalgette 2 years ago. And this depicts the morning air test when Squadron Leader Bazalgette was testing his aircraft, and that afternoon he lost his life trying to save 2 injured crew members. And Ken, I hope you accept this in the spirit it is intended. There you go.
Thank you.
Well, this was a surprise. I put in 1,566 hours flying a Lancaster. And believe me, as the Padre said earlier, a lot of it has been straight fun.
Thank you, Ken. I have